saga in which bloody repressions is very typical when the authorities were being challenged for any reason. And so it's one thing to read about it in history books. It's another thing to be witness to the events that happened. I talked to students who were returning from the square on Sunday, June 4th morning. They were students mainly of Beijing University and Beijing Normal University. Beijing is a very interesting city. It's very crowded, but with very broad boulevards in major thoroughfares through the city. And the streets were quite barren of people every morning. But by 9 o'clock, when I heard really a roaring noise coming down from the southern side of the city, I saw people literally rushing out the buildings, and within about 10 minutes, there must be about 50 to 60,000 people just around me, lining the streets. And what we saw was students returning from the square, those who survived the massacre. And students were bloody, they were battered, they were still defiant, they shouted slogans, down with the government, down with Deng, and so on. And they were showing off casings of machine gun bullets, and some of these were about as long as this pen, fairly, well, maybe 10 or 11 inch long bullet casings. And they related how the massacre taking place, and the atmosphere was just one in which it's really hard to describe. I felt torn up inside just seeing the students, in spite of the experiences they've had. The discipline they still demonstrated absolutely impressed me. All the major public buildings in Beijing during the week were draped with banners praising the Communist Party, and we had 2 big banners in front of our hotel. And I saw the students coming in, and I had gone down the street, and I ran back to the hotel, and I told the manager, I said, students are coming back. I said, best thing is to have all the foreigners vacate the lobby and send them back to the rooms, and expect something to happen. The students came up to the hotel. And a riot could easily have erupted at that point. They were emotional, and when they saw the signs, the banners praising the Communist Party, I mean, that was an open act of, that was almost a declaration of war as far as the students were concerned. But rather than rioting, they sent a delegation of 3 students, talked to the manager, and all they wanted was to have the banners taken down. And they put the banners down and they burned it. They sang patriotic songs, gave speeches, and they marched back to the university. And what a sight. In retreat, bloody, survivors from Mexico, and the kind of self-discipline absolutely impressed me. And the next day or so, I went to visit some of the students at Beijing University, talked to the students, and still very defiant. The faculty members, those who were very active, particularly the junior faculty members who were very active, were very worried. They said that it's time to engage in what they call the second phase of the struggle, and that is to go underground. And if you know a little of China, it's very difficult to go underground with the social control mechanism they have. And I was quite surprised over the fact that a number of the dissidents had been able to go underground and finally emerge in Hong Kong. I managed to meet one of them. I missed Wu Kai-se, who had come out to Hong Kong the day after I left. But I knew that he was coming out. I talked to people at Chinese University in Hong Kong, and that the underground was very active, and that they had means of spiriting people out of China. And that itself really impressed me, because the depth as well as the pervasiveness with which the dissatisfaction of the government have been expressed, not just in the demonstrations, but in remote villages. People were aware of what was happening, and they were generally sympathetic. Just a couple of real quick comments in responding to comments made by Adrian and participants, particularly with regards to sanctions. I'm not quite sure, how people look at the way President Bush has handled the situation. I'm very pleased. Particularly, I think he stuck his neck out more than most people would appreciate. The fact that he shouted from at the American embassy is an absolute affront to Deng personally, as well as to the Chinese government. And the fact that as long as Fan Lizhi is still in the embassy, there's absolutely no way in which the US government and the Chinese government could have any means of communicating or approaching at this point. And it has been suggested that perhaps an amicable solution could be worked out to have Fan Lizhi leave Beijing for a third country, rather than come out to the States, and that is still being worked out. And so his go slow, cautious policy with regards to China, I think, at least at this point, is probably the best one. Quite often, I think in the States particularly, and in the West in general, we swing from extremes. We, including myself, and I'm an overseas Chinese, third generation in Malaysia, removed from China. And for us to try to understand China, as outsiders looking in, it's almost paraphrasing the scripture. We look through a glass dimly. We do not quite fully understand. We swing from one end of the pendulum to the other. We swing from extremes to extreme. We praised them for the past 5-6 years. We put them on a pedestal. Notwithstanding the fact that he had accomplished a lot in terms of economic reforms, and I, would give him a lot of credit. But the fact simply is that China is not as free a society as we romantically paint China to be. And perhaps for a while yet, China will not be, I think, will not be. And so the idea of even democracy, Western style, being put in place in China is really far remote from my mind. And even from among the students and faculty and business as well as government officials that are talking in China, I do not quite grasp whether they fully understand democracy as we talk about democracy over here. Democracy is used in China almost as a buzzword for a conglomerate of feelings, frustrations, dissatisfaction with the government. Not the democracy in terms of the political process we understand over here. When they talk about democracy, they say, we don't want inflation. That's got nothing to do with democracy. They want better jobs. That's got nothing to do with democracy. And so I'm not quite sure whether democracy, Western style, would be transplanted or implanted in China in the near future. And the major argument, which is a good one, I think, on the part of the reformers of both sides of the spectrum, both the Zhao faction as well as the Li Peng faction, simply is this: that some of the major economic successes we see in recent years have taken place in countries where there was not, quote-unquote, the Western type of freedom. Look at South Korea. South Korea achieved most of its major economic successes under a rather repressive regime under Park and General Chung. Very successful. And similarly to in Taiwan, which had also similarly experienced the White Terror in the late 40s, early 50s. And so, and also in Chile. And so the argument simply exists that perhaps Western-style democracy might not necessarily be, a causal linkage to economic development, and I tend to buy that. At the same time, I think we should not underestimate the importance or the impact of commercial ties with China. China could very easily retreat back to its shell like it did for 21 years, between 49 and 71. And could carry on fairly much self-sufficient on its own, notwithstanding what will happen to the citizens. We are dealing with people who are so ideologically inclined, they really do not care. The economic impact of Western trade with China is such that I think it's perhaps one of the best hope for China in the future. Over here, we need to swallow our own ideological pride, but not expecting miracles to happen in China with regards to political reforms the way we hope it would happen. And just let me give you an example. Like a lot of other Western business educators, I took part in a couple of seminars 2-3 years ago and again last year. My one question was, and I asked quite often, what will happen to Hong Kong after 1997 when Hong Kong is returned to Chinese rule? They turned the tables around to me and said, what will happen to us when Hong Kong is incorporated with China? And from their own analysis, and there's evidence to indicate that this is true, the impact of even prior to 1997, currently we're talking about 1987, 89, the impact of Taiwan and Hong Kong on China is such that the hinterlands in China, even as close by as Guizhou, and Sichuan and other provinces really feel that they are now under colonial rule from Guangdong, Fujian, and Hong Kong and Taiwan. The economic impact of the coastal provinces in South China, in particular, on the rest of China is incredible. They have brain drain from all over China. The passenger privates are flooding to special economic zones, what they call open cities for trade with the West and so on. And what we have right now begun to see really is the bipolar development in China, where the coastal cities and the coastal provinces are so advanced, and then the hinterlands are really left neglected. And consequently, what we see as a political struggle in Beijing is also the political struggle of those factions who represent the quote-unquote exploited provinces within the hinterlands of China, and the progressive elements and the urban and industrialized coastal provinces and cities. So this struggle will continue. I'm not a political analyst or political scientist, but I would venture to say this. Notwithstanding what the repressive actions taken by the current regime over the weekend of June the 3rd and 4th, I'm quite convinced that the Li Peng's faction would not want to change the directions in terms of economic and political reforms that China has embarked. I think what has changed is the speed with which change is taking place. China was really hurtling along, at a breakneck speed for the past 5 years. And even from those of us who have some understanding of what was happening in China, it cannot sustain that level of growth that it has been gathering. All of the easy work with regards to economic reform had been accomplished. The development of the agricultural sector with great success. And then, the embarking of urban reforms is a tough one because they're involving a much larger populace, they're involving a much more complicated set of political, economic, and political balancing work that has got to take place. So I'm quite convinced, I'm hopeful on a number of points that things is not as bleak as it seems. Obviously I'm outraged. Obviously, I'm despondent and despair, particularly the dark hours when I was in Beijing. But at the same time, I'm optimistic over the fact that the depth with which the quote-unquote rebellion had taken place. I was just visiting with Margaret Stanley and find even in Shanxi province, in Yan'an, remote villages, citizens were providing financial support to the students in Beijing. And how long can Big Brother impose its propaganda machinery on the people? Sure, they buy the party line for now, but that doesn't mean that they accept the inevitability of a repressed society. My only fear is when it erupts next time, it will be very long, that it's going to be a lot less peaceful than the way the students have conducted it the last time around. I think Gorbachev is a lot more realistic. He understands that economic reform is a two-edged sword. You cannot have economic reform without political loosening up. And so this glasnost and perestroika might be something which the Chinese leadership has not been quite willing to accept. The fact simply is this, Russia is trying, the Soviet Union is trying to provide a lot more flexibility in dealing with the question of trying to overhaul a really archaic economic system that does not work. And so in China, they have tried to free up the economic side, but the political side of the equation has not been dealt with. It has not been thought through, I think, very carefully. And so we see the consequences of economic reform. I'm optimistic simply because of the fact that the genie is out of the bottle right now. You just can't put it back in anymore. The people cannot be fooled. They can be cowed. They are not fooled. And the fact simply is that we have instantaneous communications. They know what's happening. And so I agree with the other panelists that the hardline thinking by Congress is probably not the most productive way in dealing with China. Sure, we can walk around with a good stick, but in the long run, is this the best solution?
Thank you very much. We seem to have run on and on up here. It's after 1 o'clock, according to the clock on the wall. You've been very patient, and then very few of you walked out. I suppose at this point we should open up for some questions, although we are into, I don't know what happens in this place after 1 o'clock, but anyway, we can certainly take a couple of questions from the floor if we may. Go ahead.
The Western media has been giving an outcry of the downfall of socialism and communism, and I was wondering what the panel felt. That's just what the reforms are leading to, or whether or not you agree with the statement.
The question is that the Western press has been reporting the imminent downfall of socialism and communism, and whether what we see happening in China is part of that picture. Well, certainly, I'll go first here, but the economic reforms, that was the basis for it. The economic reforms going on in China were changing China's socialism to something else, to market socialism, to socialism with a Chinese character, various other terms. The point is that in the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, these reforms had, certainly the political reforms had changed the political context, and the economic reforms are slow in coming. But they've been working on the political reforms. In China, they did the economic reforms in 1978, and everybody was whooping up and jumping up and down because China was so exciting because the growth rate was 8-10% a year and that sort of thing. And therefore, we could see market economies, individual entrepreneurs developing, and therefore we could see that from our analysis that Marxism clearly was not the answer and that capitalism was the way to go. Now with China's repression occurring, it seems to me that, as I was arguing before, I think that this is sort of the last stand of the old school, in a sense, trying to maintain the Stalinist model, the central command structure, and that will be something that in the long run I think is going to fade, as the economic reforms China desperately needs to maintain this economic reform. They have $35 billion worth of debt they got to pay off in the next decade. And they have to pay it off with hard currency, and the hard currency comes from these joint ventures from the tourists. The tourist trade in China, of course, is not dead, but the hotels are running at 30% occupancy when they've been running 90%. I mean, that's one form of foreign exchange, and all the Hong Kong businessmen apparently are looking other places to put their money. China's, has to have they desperately need this technology. They need the seminars that Professor Wong has been providing them to be able to carry on this economic reform. And though an economic reform is reform, it changes things. Now, whether it means the death of Marxism, I don't know, because it depends how you want. Because the definition is always changing. The definition of socialism always changes. Marx had a definition of socialism. Lenin had a definition of socialism. Stalin had Tito had one. Castro has one. Everybody's got a different definition of what the hell the system is, and every one of them is a slight variation because nationalism changes the context for this. And so you can always argue that it's socialism. It's socialism with Chinese characteristics. It isn't dead. It's different. But maybe it looks more to us now like it's socialism/capitalism. But that's from our perspective. It's the same problem. We're looking through the mirror, and we're looking at things, and we see some familiar things. We see small-scale entrepreneurs doing business in China, apparently in a free market economy at some level, and we immediately run with that, and that here we have capitalism running wild, and from that we will now see the death of socialism. But from the Chinese perspective, they're not going to argue that, that's for sure. But they may argue, they have a different approach to it. So I would say that the obituary on Marxism has probably been written a little early, but again, it also comes down to the definition of what are we talking about when we talk about Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, or a Marxist or a communist socialist system. After all these systems are socialist. None of them are communist in terms of the utopian communist system. They're all on the road to communism, and they all have different routes. No one's ever been there before. It's a utopia. I mean, at the end of the road is a utopia, and nobody's gotten there yet, and they're all trying to get it from different directions. I mean, we're trying to do something. We're trying to get to utopia too, I suppose. I mean, we have a lot of problems, but we don't mark it out with a big gold star. This is where we're going. We don't have a name for this. I mean, there's the Great Society and things like that out there, but
sanctions that Dr. Bennett mentioned, would any of that make any difference, other than make a difference in the Chinese economy, in terms of decisions, political decisions that the government makes, until the time comes when Deng Xiaoping dies, and there's a power struggle, and things change? The related question is this. The whole issue of, if you say to the student, the time is on the side of the students, how is that going to work itself out politically? After Deng Xiaoping dies, the time is on their side. And I'm thinking of the issue of succession, because that was an issue under Mao Zedong. You'll succeed Deng Xiaoping.
Well,
What's to the advantage of the students in that succession?
I'm going to make a couple comments, and I got to run here. But all I can say is that this is a succession crisis. What's going on right now, in a sense. I mean, that's really what I mean, Deng Xiaoping has selected 2 successors, and he's cashiered them both. And so now we're left with Li Beng, who is apparently the successor, or the new party secretary, or party secretary Jiang. But it's not clear. But this is a long-term transition where China has yet to figure out how to move the crown from one person to another without this kind of in-house fighting. But that's really, in many ways, what's been going on here.
And nothing that any Westerner does, including President Bush, is going to make any difference.
Right.
It's entirely internal to China, and they will not be affected by any decisions that Congress makes in terms of political decisions. Is that correct?
But at the same time, though, I think the fact that the communique that came out of Paris this past weekend, it is very hopeful. When you have a united front of the leadership of the world's top or leading democracies as well as industrial powers, saying that this is not acceptable behavior, as a civilized nation in 1989. That sends a very powerful message. But at the same time, there is no the raw and negative edge has been taken out. They know that it is not acceptable, and that they need to back off on that repressive road. But at the same time, the door is being left open for further communications as well as cooperation. I think just trying to isolate China and treat it as a pariah for the next 10 years is not going to help the situation either. I think it would accentuate what road the Heartland is taking, and so it's very difficult for us to accept what has happened without doing something about it. And I think you're right. Or personally, I feel there are some things you can do and some things you can't. And this might be a situation in which there's nothing absolutely we can do about it. But perhaps to have patience to wait it out.
Yeah, let me just add one thing that we can do is to prepare for the death of Deng Xiaoping is to gather another political power, like the student, the intellectuals together, so make it ready when Deng dies, then we can have another voice to, in that case, to try to create a more democratic system. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, finish.
I think what the students demand is institutionalized systems of the politics in China. So they try to ensure that after the death of Deng Xiaoping, there will be the institutionalized system in China to ensure that no one can be the dictator. So I think, of course, the students was massacred. But if they win, what they need is institutionalized means to ensure that China can go the democratic way, at least closest to that system. So I also, in response to Dr. Wang's speech, there is asked about the ambiguity of the democracy in the slogans, in the students' slogans. I think you couldn't fully comprehend the meaning of democracy in the demand of the students unless you are the peoples in China. I think what they need is a basic right. What they need is a basic right, at least the freedom of expression without being massacred. Yeah, I think this is what they need. At least some of the basic right in China was was eliminated from the constitutions, from the rules of the parties, and also the party. What they want is in China is no longer to be the one party or the paramount leading roles of the single party in China. I think this is what they demanded. In terms of the difference, Bush or American economic sanction will be made, I think, of course, it does make a difference. You can see from the Chinese newspaper in response to the even the threat of the economic sanctions. On the one hand, they said no one can defeat China. They go a long way from the since 1949. They can self-dependence. They can self-reliant. But on the other hand, they always said we wish there's still foreign exchange relations going on, and we need help from other countries, and the economic sanction, I would add that most of the economic exchange, if we sanction China, doesn't hurt China in general, except the food export to China. Most of the imported goods are luxury goods. In China, you can see along the Tiananmen, along the Beijing Strait, there's lots of Benz, lots of Toyotas, and lots of luxury goods in the market. Lots of commodity, which is not affordable by the ordinary peasant or workers. So the economic sanction, I think, doesn't hurt the peasant or the workers, the ordinary people, too much, except the food, which just exported from Iowa, like agricultural goods, does make some difference. But I think most of the economic sanctions doesn't hurt the ordinary people, just hurt the corrupted government officials.